Okay, welcome back. So as I was trying to explain you in the previous module, we were looking at the impact of different chemicals because essentially again some of the stuff that I keep on repeating again and again because we are interested as part of this course. What we are interested is in impact of different chemicals on the environment from its cradle to grave. So that's the life cycle analysis, isn't it? So that's what we explained to you as a life cycle analysis. So what we are doing right now is trying to get ourselves ready to do a big life cycle analysis exercise later on in this particular course. So one of the important aspects is, of course, how to do the risk assessment, what are the chemicals involved, what are the toxicity of the chemicals. So we looked at those aspects in last few modules, and we'll continue that discussion in this module as well, where we'll look at some of the example chemicals and its health effects, and what are the health effects of the certain chemicals. So we'll start with the chemicals which is very common, which have a long history of environmental contamination as well as the health impact as well as the environmental impact. So let's look at the first chemical. You must have heard the term PCBs, which is the polychlorinated biphenyl. It's the most widespread chemical contaminant known. So it's used extensively, and it gets discharged from factories into the waterways. It can vaporize from pens, or also it could be from the landfill. If you burn something with a PCB containing material, it can become airborne. It can go into the airborne chemical. It can re-enter ecosystem with precipitation, can leak from industrial equipment, and there could be accidental spills or illegal dumping due to high cost of legally disposing PCB waste. So PCBs is a most widespread chemical contaminant. So it's being used in most of the industrialized world. This PCB you see getting into the waterways, getting into the soil, getting into the air. Why it is important? Because it's a threat to the health. The laboratory tests done on certain species, as I said earlier, it's usually we work with rats, mice, guinea pigs, those tortoise, those kind of like rabbits. So laboratory testing shows toxicity even at low concentration to several species which has been tested, and they have been found as skin disorder. It is also endocrine disruptors. Endocrine disruptor, we haven't used that term before in this class so far. Endocrine disruptors, and you may have heard the term endocrine disrupting compounds. Endocrine disrupting compounds are the compound which affects the endocrine system of the of any species body. Many times you hear that we are seeing femalization of male fish. Male fish is showing female character, or male alligators are showing female character showing up. So it's because of the endocrine system getting affected, and that becomes that leads to feminization of like the masculine species getting into the feminization, and that actually have an impact on in terms of the reproduction system of different species out there. So EDCs, which is called EDCs, is a short form of endocrine disrupting compound. That's another area of big research, and PCBs is one of the EDCs. EDCs are a group of chemicals, there are several chemicals which can have an impact on endocrine system, PCBs being one of them. So PCB is like a contamination of PCB. You see a lot happening in water bodies or sediments and other stuff. There has been dredging operation. There has been a lot of PCBs contaminated. Cleanup is underway. This particular picture shows you a Hudson River, which is in New York, like New Jersey, New York area. They have started cleaning it up in May 2009, and the cleaning was in progress. For the first phase, it went up to 2012, and then they have another phase starting in 2012. And it's still today, we have traces of PCBs showing up in the Hudson River, because it's a persistent compound. It does persist in the environment, doesn't degrade very quickly. So that's why these kind of contaminants, it becomes a nuisance on a long-term basis. Other thing is of dioxin, which is the ones that you see, the list that I have on this particular module. The type of examples that I'm showing are the ones which are either widespread, which we see it at many places around the world, or has very high negative impact. So dioxins is a potential carcinogen, and it also creates a lot of impact on different systems. And with a very little level of dioxin, it's bad for health and the environment. And how it is produced? It is produced as a byproduct of the production of herbicides such as Agent Orange. This is one kind of herbicide which is used to clear jungle vegetation during the Vietnam War. During the Vietnam War, to clear the jungle, they use this Agent Orange, and the Agent Orange, when they produce this Agent Orange, one of the byproduct was this dioxin. And what kind of impact it has? It has a Parkinson disease. Parkinson disease is where you start your balance you start losing your balance. Those of you who may have watched the movie Black, where that Amitabh Bachchan he starts having that Parkinson problem, where you cannot even do your like small day-to-day activities. Or it also have an impact on heart disease. It can have a leukemia kind of impact. So dioxins is a big problem, and one of the sources of dioxin in the environment today. Dioxins are also put under the category of POPs, which is POPs. You may have heard the term POPs, P-O-P with a small s. This POPs is persistent organic pollutants. So that's persistent organic pollutant. As the name suggests, persistent means it persistent in the environment. It doesn't degrade very quickly. So it is and it's an organic. So that's why it is organic and pollutant. So it's a persistent organic pollutants. There is a group of persistent organic pollutants, the POPs, and dioxin is one of the major compound. And dioxin is not only one compound. Dioxin is actually a group of compounds. There are different compounds together is placed under dioxins. Similar to PAH. When you hear the term PAH, which is the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon, it's a group of 13-14 different compounds which is together is called PAH. So dioxins are formed. One of the major source of dioxins today is the uncontrolled burning of garbage. So the waste which is burning. So whether if you see in Kolkata, or if you recently we had a big problem in Mumbai few months back. In Mumbai we had the garbage dump on fire for several days. In Delhi during very close to when we had this news of the surgical strike in the Indo-Pakistan border, around the same time we had the issue of the landfill catching fire in Delhi, and the landfill was on fire for several days. So when this garbage burns, because of a lot of plastics that we are using today, especially those film plastic, those thin plastics that you use for the grocery bags and other. So these actually lead to the production of dioxins and furans, which is part of the persistent organic pollutants and which are very bad for the environment. So burning garbage is a total no-no. Burning garbage has a very negative impact on the environment and on human health. And as of today, uncontrolled burning of garbage is the #1 source of persistent organic pollutants. It's not my data. It has been reported by the United Nations Environmental Protection Agency's report, which has done an elaborate survey of this burning of garbage throughout the world. They looked at the air pollutants coming out of it, and they also looked at the air pollutants from the other sources and where these POPs, persistent organic pollutants, are present, and they have come to the conclusion that #1 source of persistent organic pollutants, of which dioxin is one of the major constituents, is actually uncontrolled burning of garbage. So if we can control the burning, if we can do a better waste management, better municipal waste and other waste management, where we don't burn this garbage in an uncontrolled way. Incineration plants are different. Don't get confused between the waste incineration plant with uncontrolled burning. Waste incineration plant, which the government of India is also promoting these days, waste to energy plants, they are there. We have a controlled burning of garbage. It's not uncontrolled burning. I'm talking about the garbage dumps, open burning. Many times even on certain places in the cities, you see that the street sweeping guy or the garbage collectors in the morning, what they do, they put all these waste in one corner and they torch it. That should not be done. That's actually creates a lot of problem in terms of dioxin release into the environment. So dioxin, what it can teach, it has a skin disorder. There are variable toxicity has been found in different test species. It's a carcinogen in most species at a high level of exposure. It's endocrine disruptors, very similar to PCBs. It also has an impact on endocrine system, and it also reduces our immune system. So as you probably, if you follow the health aspect, the immune system means that what is the resistance of our body against any external factor which may be harmful to us. So that's why if for the very small kid, very small babies, we say that don't take them out too much, don't let them exposed to certain kind of negative environmental conditions, because their immune system has not developed yet. Until the kids are especially up to 5-6 years of age, smaller the kid, less is the immune system. And then when they go into the teenagers, by the time most of the immune system is developed. And but when the people gets older, again the immune system starts going down. Somebody, unfortunately, if someone suffers from some sort of disease like cancer, where they have to go through this chemotherapy reduces the immune system of the, like the immune reduces the capability of the body and in terms of their immune system drastically. So anybody that's why anybody going through chemotherapy, we say that we keep them in a house which is clean. You don't want too many people meeting them, because the virus can get, because their immune system is so weak, so they can get they get suppressed. Dioxin also creates a suppression of the immune system. So it may not impact you directly, but if you are exposed to dioxin and your immune system goes down, that means that you can get a lot of other disease in your body much quicker, because your body cannot fight against those disease. Dioxins, unfortunately, has been in recent times, in the recent past, dioxins has been used as a tool to poison. Here you see the two pictures of this is a Ukrainian president, Viktor Yushchenko. In its photos, from the left picture is from the March 2002. So this is the picture of March 2002 of a Ukrainian president, and then in December 2004 you see his picture where he is exposed to this dioxin poisoning. So Yushchenko was scarred by deliberate dioxin poisoning during his 2004 presidential candidacy. So during his presidential candidacy of 2004, you can see that just in the matter of March 2002 to December 2004, so it's around 1.5 years. And in between 1.5 years, what is the drastic impact on the body? Because this gentleman, because there is a lot of conspiracy theory. We don't know how he got exposed to it, but there is one conspiracy theory is in terms of he was not friendly to Russia, so he was kind of anti-Russian camp in Ukraine. And so Russia got him poisoned. Russia doesn't want him to be the president of Ukraine, so he got poisoned by some Russian spy agency or whatever. But whatever be the case, that's not important for how he got poisoned. But just look at in 1.5 years, the pictures on those two dates. It's such a drastic impact. So that's why when I say that dioxin is one of the very, very important, in terms of dioxin exposure, is very, very critical in terms of environmental and human health impact. So this is just an example to illustrate that example, that how quickly one can go from how quickly one body gets destroyed by the dioxin poisoning. Other big areas which we hear a lot about the asbestos. In the Western world, it is pronounced as asbestos. In India, we call it asbestos. Here, asbestos has probably caused more death and disabling disease than any other hazardous substances. But we need to be careful here. The asbestos seeds, because I don't want to create any controversy, so that you don't get into you don't get confused. The asbestos, we do use a lot of asbestos seeds in India. So using of asbestos seeds as a roofing material, which is typically when we use it in India, we use it with the concrete. It's mixed with the concrete material. So as long as it is mixed with the concrete material, it is there encapsulated, it is not, you are not exposed to the asbestos chemicals directly, it's not a problem. So the problem comes when you are exposed to the asbestos chemicals directly. So when you have the concrete layer on top of it, it prevents you from getting exposed to asbestos. So that's be clear on that. But say if you work in a plant where this asbestos material is being used, if you are working in a mining area where this asbestos material is being mined, That's where the problem is. Also, when this asbestos roofing material will get like broken down. So if it gets broken down into smaller pieces, if you make a powdery material out of that for some reason, in that case again you can potentially get exposed to asbestos. So you need to be careful of the exposure scenario. So it doesn't mean that using the asbestos roofing material is bad, but say in case that the roofing material gets broken down for some reason due to any natural disasters, or due to you are replacing this roofing material with a newer roofing material, handling of those material is important in a safe manner so that you don't get exposed to the asbestos chemical which is present in that material. So what is asbestos? It's a group of 6 fibrous silicate material. It is found almost worldwide. Canada is one of the major source of asbestos. In Canada and many other countries, they have stopped using asbestos now. In India, we still use it, but in many of the developed countries, they don't use asbestos anymore. Asbestos has a very good fire insulation property. That's why it was used. It was used because it has a very good fireproofing facility. So many of the older buildings, for the fireproofing, they used to use this asbestos material. The newer building, they are using some other material, and then they are replacing this asbestos materials out there. There actually asbestos material is used as basically as the asbestos material. No layer of concrete or thing in there. So it's used mostly for fireproof, and it's utilized to reinforce clay and cloth since the Stone Age. 85% of the asbestos used today is incorporated into asbestos cement construction material. So if it's encapsulated with the cement construction, it may not be that bad, but if you are exposed directly to the asbestos material, it's a problematic. So what is the problem? It's if you inhale it, the fibers lodge in air passage and cells within lungs. So your fibers get into the air passage, and then it's mostly your you will have pulmonary problem. You will have the lungs problem and your pulmonary respiratory systems problem. So this is Montana, which one village in Montana. It's a small town of Montana. It's only 3,000 people population. It's along the Contd River in Montana, which is in the United States. Has emerged as the deadliest Superfund site. Superfund site means the contaminated site. When we say Superfund site, it is actually a used term. Will at some point in one of the module later on, I will explain you what the Superfund, how this term came out. But for now, just think about the Superfund site means a contaminated site. It's a contaminated site which is contaminated by hazardous waste, by the hazardous material which is coming into the environment. So it is one of the deadliest Superfund site in the US history, because due to decades of contamination of asbestos fiber from a near vermiculite mine. So in there was a mine nearby where they were extracting all these asbestos material, and since they were extracting all this asbestos material, the people got exposed to it, the water got exposed, the air, soil, everything got exposed. And this is one of it's a small town, 3,000 people, not too big of a town. It's almost possibly less than a big village in India, where we have more than sometimes like 10-15,000 people in a village. But it's a small town of 3,000, and they had this is one of the deadliest Superfund site in the US history, coming from asbestos poisoning. What it causes? It's as I said earlier, it's a lung issue. We are mostly worried about the inhalation part through asbestos exposure. So it leads to a scarring of lung tissue. You have scarring of lungs. It can lead to lung cancer. Exposure risk, exposure increases risk 7 times. With cigarette smoking, risk is 60 times. So it is not as bad as a cigarette smoking, but again, it does causes increased risk by 7 times. And also it leads to mesothelioma, which is the cancer of lung or the stomach lining. Asbestos is the only known cause, invariably fatal, generally within 2 years of diagnosis. So if you have asbestos poisoning, as you have some sort of asbestos exposure at a high level, again, remember the dose response curve. We are looking at if you look at the typical S curve we talked about, if you are at the lower level where you don't have that no exposure, there will be no impact. But once you have the exposure, remember that we had this S curve going up. So when you have the higher exposure limit where things you will get exposed to, it says that a higher concentration within 2 years of diagnosis. Within 2 years of diagnosis, people have been found to be, it has been found to be fatal to many people. So asbestos again is one of the major problem. Here you see a picture of workers in full body gear. They are removing asbestos containing material from a high school. Actually, as I said earlier, most of the older buildings, asbestos was used as a fireproofing material. So now in the developed countries, they have stopped using asbestos. In the Indian scenario, since most of the buildings we make is the concrete, bricks, so concrete and brick itself acts as a fireproofing material. So we don't have to really have a fireproofing material goes in there. But nowadays, when we are going on to more into the modular building where we have beams and columns and the walls are just the partition walls, and we are going for the gypsum drywall. Gypsum drywall has a layer of basically a layer of paper on top of it. They are no more fireproof. So in between the gypsum drywall, we put some fireproofing material, and we use different type of fireproofing material. But we are not using asbestos material, especially in the Western world, and gradually in the developing countries also we are not using asbestos material. But asbestos is a very good fireproofing material. That's what it was being used. So here in this particular picture, what you see is this workers in the full body protective gear, because asbestos was used as a fireproofing material. So in between they are trying to remove those asbestos material, and so they should not to get exposed to this asbestos material, they are using all these suit that is called actually a Tyvek suits. They are all totally covered with mask and all that, so that they don't get exposed to it for getting any sick. So that's another example. Again, as I said, we are just looking at some of the, this is not a total exhaustive list. We are just looking at some of the example chemicals which are prevalent, which have been used a lot either in the past or presently being used. So next we'll look at is on lead. Lead, as you know, as if you think about today, lead we think of today mostly from the electronic waste. All of us carry some sort of a smartphone these days. Most of us do carry smartphone. I should not say all of us, but most of us do carry smartphone in the middle class or upper middle class population. And then we also carry a laptop and like some iPad or any kind of your pad kind of system, like a small tablet. And all of these, wherever you have a electrical circuit board, if you remember electrical circuit board, those soldering iron that we used to use for our high school projects or a science project, the soldering iron, the chemical that is used for soldering iron, that is like a small, that you see the thread that you had where you used to use it for the soldering iron, that soldering material used to have a lot of lead. And we are trying to get rid of those lead from those soldering iron as well. And many of these newer electronic has lesser and lesser amount of lead. So lead is used in a soldering iron. Lead used in the house paint. Lead was used in the gasoline, in the petrol. That's why you see unleaded gasoline. Next time you visit to a petrol pump, look at that label very carefully. It says unleaded. Unleaded means what? At some point of time it has lead. So that's why it is unleaded now. So why we want to get rid of lead from our system? As you can see in this particular slide, if you go like some of the bullets, lead it impairs brain function. One of the theory behind the demise of Roman Empire, if you are following the history, we had a Roman Empire and the Roman Empire collapsed. Towards the end of the Roman Empire, the people, the kings and the people, the ruling class became very crazy. One of the theory that is put forward is during those particular period, they were using the utensils. Those utensils had the lead lining, which we had a lot of lead lining in those utensils, and those utensils they were using to consume alcohol, and the alcohol has a typically lower pH. I assume that you understand pH. pH is how much is the acidity of the system. So at low pH, most of the heavy metals are in solution, so they come into solution. So when these people consume this low pH with alcohol which is low pH, some of the lead which is lying in those vessels were getting dissolved into this alcohol, and they were consuming this lead as well. And with the consumption of lead, their brain function starts getting impacted. They become hyper, and they have a poor they will have a higher, like they will have very hyperactivity. So that's why they got into all those having those fight between, say, tiger or lion with a man, with a convict or a criminal. Those kind of things were kind of what you saw towards the end of Roman Empire. It's because of people. There's one theory is it's because of the hyper, their brain, they got so much, their brain started getting impacted, and gradually they lost the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire collapsed. So it does impact brain, and it gets to hyper irritability, poor memory, and you lose your memory or sluggishness. High level causes mental retardation. You have the epileptic convulsions, epilepsy, coma, even lead to death. Higher lead pollution. So house paint remains one of the most notable source of lead poisoning problem, and many Western countries have already banned lead in the house paint. Unfortunately, in the Indian scenario, we are still using lead in our houses. So that's becomes a problem. 40% of the lead ingested by our pre-scholars remain in their body versus 10% in the adult. So because of that's why we don't the priest impacts the small kids. Interferes with the blood cell formation, leads to the kidney damage, and it also causes some degree of harm where exposure carries some degree of harm, which increases with the level of exposure increases. So that's kind of the big picture on the lead. And if you look at this particular graph, this is how with the removal of lead in the petrol, which was one of the contaminated. If you look at from the y-axis here is the number of children tested. X-axis is the different years from 1997 to 2000 and 2007, and on the y-axis over here is the confirmed elevated blood lead levels as a percentage of the children tested. So here how much children were tested. Here we are looking at the percentage of the kids that tested. So as the lead was removed, from this gasoline, we start seeing decrease in the blood level of the kids. So this study was done in US, but similar thing will show up in other countries as well. And but if you look at here, the columns represents the number of children tested, and these small rectangles where with the yellow line is actually showing us confirmed elevated blood levels as a percentage of the children tested. And as we removed the lead from this gasoline, from the petrol and the diesel, our blood level went down to almost to zero. So that's in the developed countries. In the developing, and here they have already banned lead-based paint in 1976. So they are not using lead in the lead-based paint. In a country like India, where we're still using lead-based paint, we are doing a lot of electronic waste recycling in a very informal way, which has a lot of lead present there. We may not see a zero in our blood, but we probably have to do it. We don't have a data like that. We need to have a data like this where we can compare where our blood level exists in terms of our kids. But why it is important? So we can, this is their blood level at the very beginning, 1976 to 1980, it was 88.2%, were greater than 10 micrograms per deciliter, but in 1999 to 2004, it came down to 1.4%. So they had a drastic drop in terms of the lead level in the blood, which is really good. So why it is important? Which we'll look at here. If you look at this particular graph, and which after this graph we'll kind of end this particular module. This here we have, if you look at the concentration of lead, here the red bars are where the lead concentration is greater than 27 parts per million, and your blue, the green ones is where the lead is less than 5.1 ppm. And which it says dentine lead. Dentine lead means the lead in their tooth samples. So small kids, they lose their teeth, the baby teeth goes away, so that teeth has been taken and then has been analyzed. So in terms of their behavior as reported by the teachers of the elementary school, as you can see, the red ones is the higher lead level. So the higher the lead level, the students were distractible, they were not persistent, they were dependent too much on the teachers, they were hyperactive, they were impulsive, they were frustrated, they were daydreamers, does not follow simple direction, unable to follow sequence, and they have low overall functioning. So if you look at all these parameters, what it is telling is because of the high level of lead, the neurological issues shows up in the kids. So that's why having too much lead is actually a problem. So that's why we have tried to remove this lead from from different sources. So in gasoline and the petrol and the diesel, that's what one area of too much of exposure. So in totality, what we looked at in this particular module is we looked at few chemicals of interest. Again, this is just a few example chemicals. You can go and read about several other chemicals, and a lot of studies have been done where people have looked at this kind of work. Arsenic, cadmium, other things can be looked at as well. But just to give you some example how this impact is studied and what are some of the impacts we looked at from the PCBs, from the dioxins, from lead and other sources in terms of and also asbestos. So those from four different type of category, we looked into this like potential environmental and human health harm. So in the next module, we'll continue this discussion and we'll go into some of this risk assessment, bioavailability, and all those aspects. So with that, we conclude this module, and I look forward to seeing you again in the next module. Thank you.